Hello everybody and welcome to this PlayStation 4 Hidden Gems entry. I am actually looking at a fairly recent game, GreedFall here. It released only a couple of months ago, I think it was mid last year. But I feel like it was overlooked by an awful lot of people, including fans of RPGs, including me. I didn't actually get around to playing it until Christmas. And once I did start to play it, I realised that I should have played it a lot earlier, because this is actually a really good game, and I hope that a lot of people who perhaps overlooked it because it was such a busy year with video games last year do give it a chance at some point. It comes to us from a developer called Spiders, and what I really like about this game is it's a combination of things. Spiders is a developer that always does interesting things. It takes creative risks, it uses settings which are perhaps not as commercially interesting as others, and it actually puts a good effort into asking some moral questions and creating a story which really challenges you to think as you're playing. And I like that in my RPGs. You know, bigger budget RPGs don't tend to really ask the hard questions or give you pause to think about what you're doing. This one does. And on top of all of that, it's actually a very attractive game. Spiders really punched above their weight with this one. I feel like it looks very much like a AAA game. Once you start to play it, you realize there are issues with it. It's not quite as refined as the big blockbuster budget titles, but it has a heart, it has a soul, and it really speaks to everything that I like about Spiders. Unless you're a big fan of RPGs, you probably haven't heard of Spiders before, but they've been kicking around for quite a while now. They're a French developer. They started out with the PlayStation 3, as far as I'm aware, with Off Orcs and Men, which was a really nice little idea that was executed in a sometimes questionable way, it must be said. Actually, no, they did Fairy before that, which was an early era PlayStation 3 downloadable title, which was pretty terrible. But from there, they've gone from strength to strength. They did Mars Warlogs, which is a really quality title. They also had the Technomancer, which was a really interesting effort to do kind of a dystopian, low power science fiction setting. And now they've got this one as well. And GreedFall is definitely their most mature work. It takes place in a large open world for a start, where most of the Spiders titles previously have had the illusion of being large and open, but have actually been quite linear in execution. This one is genuinely quite open. You do have an awful lot of decisions about where you want to go. There's a lot of side quests which you can take at any order, or you can ignore a lot of them if you want to, and you can really involve yourself with the world as you see fit. There are a couple of major factions that you need to deal with, and your relationship and the way that the narrative falls out will really depend on how you manage those relationships, because as you can probably guess, they're often at odds with one another, and they're often asking you to do competing things, and if you do a favour for one of the factions, you're probably going to annoy another faction. So in that way, it's fairly standard setup as far as RPGs go. The developers have clearly taken a lot of inspiration from The Witcher in the way that the quest structure works. So they've really tried to make their quests about more than just fetch quests or kill a certain number of enemies or whatever. They've really tried to make sure that each quest is a little narrative experience in its own right. And there's some really interesting ones in there. It ranges from investigations, there's a little bit of a couple of horror themed quests in there, there's a little bit of stealth. The stealth mechanics aren't great, but they're there, and the quest itself is a nice diversion from what you've seen previously. So it's definitely mature and confident is a word I want to use. It's a confident game. It definitely shows that this is not an inexperienced developer at this point. The fighting is fairly clumsy. It has what you'd expect from a modern RPG. There's the standard range of attack buttons. You can do counters, which are pretty important if you want to keep your health up. You can choose from a couple of different builds of characters, whether you want to be a magic user, a ranged fighter, or a melee combatant. But there are it's not quite as refined as The Witcher, which I mentioned previously. It's a little bit shanky in times, and there's a little bit of a roughness around the edges with the combat system. It works, and I never felt like I was unfairly done by, which is a step up from Spiders, because a lot of the time I felt like I was fighting with a combat system to enjoy the narrative in a Spiders game. With this one, I felt like I was really engaged with the fighting as well. I didn't try to avoid combat wherever possible. I just took it as part of the experience. It's not the best part of the Spiders game experience, but it's by no means now a liability. So going forwards, you would expect Spiders to get better at this stuff again, but they've hit that point now where you can enjoy the game for what it is. You don't have to keep making excuses for the parts of it that you didn't like as much. But now to talk about the thing that I love most about this game, and its themes. Spiders games have always had really strong thematic core. It's not just in the setting and the characters, though they've always had done a really good job of creating characters and settings which are different and unique and something that you haven't seen before. But with GreedFall, it's about the storytelling, it's about the decisions that you make, and the way that the developer is really able to make you think about every little action that you take. So GreedFall takes place on an island which is undiscovered, in the sense that it's ripe for colonization, and it's very colonial in its tone. So there are three colonial factions which are all loosely based on Middle Eastern or European cultures. One is a very fervent religious order, very much based on the kind of the Roman Church. Another one is based on a kind of Middle Eastern style or Ottoman Empire style nation, in which they're very kind of heavily into trade and making money. And then there's EU, which is also a very trade savvy nation. It's kind of it's modeled after the kind of neutral nations throughout Europe, where it's about kind of playing the sides and making sure that you make everybody happy and staying very neutral in their conflicts as they fight with one another. So you're very much stuck in the middle of that. In addition to that, there's the natives of the island, and they're kind of stuck in the sense that their island is being colonized, and they're not necessarily happy about that, or they're not happy about that at all. And there's certainly an element there where they're fighting back, and you will want to take their side in some of their fights as well, while at the same time brokering peace with the other nations. So there's a lot of political conflict that goes on in GreedFall, and the game really kind of steps back with its hands up and lets you make those decisions for yourself. I will say that it is fairly leading in places. You will see towards the end of the video here a scene which is really your introduction to the Roman Catholic nation as based on the island, and their very inquisitor style, and it immediately will give most people, almost every person I would hope, a sour taste about that faction. Of course, things are more complex than that, and as you get to know the people who are not necessarily the inquisitors, the people who are more rational, you will have the chance to become more sympathetic towards that faction. But there are moments where it's fairly clumsily handled, and it's clear that the developers want to set you up to feel something before making you question that as you're playing. But for the most part, it's written really well, and it really is very much about you making your decisions and living by them. It's a very sensitive subject for Spiders to tackle, because even though the colonial era is largely over and the immediate, colonial powers are very much not anymore, the impact of what happened through that era is still very much felt through the world, and it still reverberates through world politics. And it's really important that we look and understand what happened through that era and have those discussions, because it's really important that we don't repeat those mistakes. We need to get to the point where we can see that there's different perspectives on the world and different ways of looking at basically everything in the world, and the idea of a colonial power where it's setting down one way of looking at things That needs to change. We need to become much more relativist in how we look at the world and engage with other cultures, and look at ourselves as well. We can't just assume that we're righteous just because we exist and we're the most powerful nation or whatever. And GreedFall really kind of tries to address that, because it casts you in that role where you are the neutral power, and that you are respected by everybody, which means your voice is really heard, and you're looking at all these kind of colonial powers squaring off against one another, and then the impact that that is having on the natives, and you're really encouraged to try and see all perspectives and engage with all perspectives and find a way to bring them all together in a way that doesn't leave anyone significantly under, well, doesn't leave anybody kind of coming off third best, basically. I also really want to mention something that I loved about the game, and that was the different characters that you could have join your party. They are such a lively bunch. You get to have characters from each of the major factions join you, so you get to have the natives and the Roman Catholics and the Ottoman Empire style character. They all kind of come together. There's also another faction called the Nauts, which are ocean faring, and each of those characters has a really interesting and unique story to tell, and it was absolutely fascinating to learn more about those characters and what made them tick and their background and their history and stuff. One of the reasons I was a big fan of Mass Effect in particular was because I really kind of engaged with every single one of the characters, and I haven't really kind of enjoyed a set of characters quite like Mass Effect's since Mass Effect. Certainly not Mass Effect Andromeda, the original trilogies, but here, where I was completely in love with the character of Garrus in Mass Effect, for example. Here there's Vasco. Vasco's a great character. The voice acting is really good. Like I mentioned earlier, this is a very mature game, and with that comes a level of maturity in the presentation that we haven't seen before. This is a great game. I hope that everybody checks it out. If you have any interest in RPGs whatsoever, overlook the fact that it's got a reputation as a B-grade RPG rather than that kind of AAA level, and give it a go. This might be that one that convinces you that there's more to RPGs than what BioWare and so on produce. So thank you very much for your watching. I hope this was interesting. Please do back me on Patreon if you enjoy my videos, and do like and subscribe if you do enjoy my videos as well. Thanks very much, and we will see you at the next one.